President Trump just gave his first interview since the revelations about his son's meeting with a Russian lawyer that contradicted his prior stories. Here he is talking to Pat Robertson of the Christian Broadcast Network. Robertson asked him about the meeting with Putin last week. Here's what the president had to say.
We had a good meeting. I think we had an excellent meeting. One thing we did is we have a ceasefire in a major part of Syria where there was tremendous bedlam and tremendous killing. And by the way, this is now 4 days. The ceasefire is held for 4 days. Those ceasefires haven't held at all. That's because President Putin and President Trump made the deal, and it's held.
He just third person himself, that's right. CBN also released a transcript of the interview. The president also told Robertson that Putin would have been happier if Hillary Clinton was president, I'm sure, because she'd, in his words, decimate the military. I don't know where any of that's coming from, but again, that's the Donald's words. And it also runs counter to the narrative that the Russians hacked into our election to help Donald Trump win. And every intelligence agency agrees with that. Everyone that is, except for our commander-in-chief. But I digress. Speaking of the president, countless times he and his team have denied any contact or collusion with the Russians. Here, just a small sampling. I could go on for 45 minutes with clips, but here's just a few of them.
Are there any ties between Mr. Trump, you or your campaign, and Putin and his regime?
No, there are not. It's absurd.
We hear experts. You know, his house cat at home once said that this is what's happening with the Russians. It's disgusting. It's so phony.
I have nothing to do with Russia.
She always likes to tie me in with Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia, folks.
Did anyone involved in the Trump campaign have any contact with Russians trying to meddle with the election?
Absolutely not, and I discussed that with the president-elect just last night.
Did any advisor or anybody in the Trump campaign have any contact with the Russians?
Well, of course not. Of course not. Why would there be any contacts between the campaigns?
There's nothing that would conclude me that anything different has changed with respect to that time period.
Nobody that I know of.
So you're not aware of any contacts during the course of the election?
How many times do I have to answer this question?
Can you just say
Russia
yes or no
is a
on it?
ruse.
Except,
it's a ruse. It had no,
Mark, God,
no effect on anything we know.
All right, we'll get to tinfoil in a second. But obviously, some of the folks here were not telling the truth. I can talk about a few folks who are no longer with the administration as a result of this. Is the White House open to legal exposure due to all those denials, which we now simply were not true? So, I start first here with the president. We know he was at Trump Tower when the meeting took place. Donnie Jr., the son-in-law, and Manafort again, who says, of course, we never talked to the Russians, okay? We also know that Donald Trump knew the principals, at least, that were involved in the meeting, and the family that supposedly, the oligarch over there in Russia, he also had dealings with going back to 2013 with the Miss whatever Universe pageant that he brought over to Moscow. If it's proven, hypothetically, Doug, that there was, that Donald Trump in fact knew, and it can be proven, how does that change this story?
It changes it in the sense that now you would have to investigate it further. There would be a reason to really investigate it. If this, I believe that if they would have said early on, yes, by the way, we had a meeting, all three of us, with this person who was talking about dirt on Hillary Clinton, we listened to him because we were curious.
Correct.
I believe none of this would even be an issue.
Absolutely.
But well, I could just say from the political side, I don't know one, and I'm in this world more than you guys, I don't know one person on any statewide campaign that if they got an email from someone promising to have Russian government officials having dirt on an opponent in a national election would have taken that meeting, let alone wouldn't have had subordinates or whatever. The idea that they did that, I don't know anyone right now, and I've talked to Republican and Democrats elected in the last 48 hours, they find this to be the most insane thing that they've ever heard of. Not just naivete and not just unsophistication, but there's exposure. I'll give you an idea. When Al Gore was running against Bush in that election, somebody from the Bush campaign sent over questions and preps, answers, and directions that they were going to go with, that were disgruntled within the Bush campaign. The Gore folks took that and immediately gave it to the FBI. I'm not saying politics is clean and antiseptic, but when a foreign and an adversary to the U.S. is giving information that would impact an election, nobody would be insane enough to follow that thing through. That said, on the political side,
not a crime to listen.
Yeah, but
it is a crime if you think you get something of value from an enemy of the United States.
Something of value begs the question.
Now, you said, Mayo, about the son-in-law. And Jared Kushner was at that meeting, no one's denying that, with Donnie Jr. and Manafort and the Russian lawyer. Now, the president's son-in-law and advisor initially did not mention the meeting on his application for security clearance. CNN now reporting it was included on a supplemental form, but only after Kushner's legal team discovered the emails about the Russian meeting while reviewing his case. Now, this is not the first or even the second time that he has not properly filled out the forms here, and this is a guy with top clearance. So we've already caught him 3 times not telling the truth. How much of a problem is this? Should security clearance be pulled? And it's said that he, maybe even more than Donnie Jr., could have some legal exposure here.
Well, look, we're always talking about these independent contractors that go on and get information, your Snowdens and people like that who share information. Here you have a person who only has his clearance based upon being the son-in-law of the president. When you stop and look at what he's privy to, what he has been entrusted to do, okay, he's supposed to be the one bringing peace to the Middle East. And let's assume all of this is a ruse. If you're lying about things that aren't even important, then how can you be trusted with things that are of consequence?
Well, that's a legitimate political point, and I think it's a very worthwhile question to ask. He does have, look, making an intentionally materially false statement, particularly under oath in a document, is a crime.
Absolutely.
That's a serious thing, and people
General
do that
Flynn, more specifically, is Exhibit A for that.
But they will have to make a case of intent, and the more often it's done, the more often there are omissions or false statements, the more circumstantial evidence of a bad intent.
But here it's going to be very difficult, unlike in the past where they said, oh, I don't remember, I meet with lots of people. Here you're on an email chain, you know, and you're talking specifically about that meeting. That's not a meeting you're going to forget.
Should have been
the one
disclosed.
where you think you're getting all the information about Hillary Clinton and it turns out not to be what you thought it was. And it goes towards your intent right there. The fact that you're meeting with this person because you believe she's going to give you possibly government information from Russia, or that she's going to be able to give you her personal information as a foreign national to undermine your opponent, it shows clearly why you're meeting with that person.
Repeatedly.
The lies are the
over
problem.
and over again after that there was no conversations. Forget just on the forums, as we showed you in soundbite after soundbite. What are you talking about? The Russians were an insane question. The issue is credibility here, where you can't chalk it up to honest mistakes anymore.
Right,
All right.
Rich, but the answer is where do they pay the price? That should be out there for the electorate. And in the next election, they should judge their credibility and dump them out of office if they think they're a bunch of liars and incompetent
If we find out, and I believe right now, it's kind of like the Ken Starr investigation as to where it started and where it went to, okay?
Understood,
right
and that's
now,
why they revoked the independent counsel statute.
Right now, Mueller, and I've heard, he's actually gotten his hands on some of the tax returns, et cetera. And I also know that some of the folks, part of the reason they haven't even gotten this, there's so much information. If they tie that there was any financial quid pro quos, if you will, for the last couple of years between the Russians and anyone in the Trump orbit, moreover, that there were specific conversations about what the Russians were doing, hacking, and that it was in any way sharing that information with the Trump campaign, then this isn't going to wait 3.5 years.
No, it's not if they find that.
Coming up next, though, we're going to pivot away from Russia, and I want to take a look at the Wells Fargo case here. This story has infuriated me almost as much as any in recent memory. A multi-billion-dollar bank just got a fine for setting up millions of new accounts for its own customers who didn't even know they had them. This was a complete conspiracy. They planned to do this all. They got caught, and they got a slap on the wrist. I got a guy who knows about class action lawsuits here, and I'm going to ask, where is the consumer protection? We'll get into that after this.